Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to making a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. All right, Aspire leaders, I'm so excited for my guest because this is someone who I've been digging into his work for a while now, and he's absolutely killing it. I had an opportunity to meet Principal Kafele in North Carolina at the NCMLE conference. I mean, he literally had hordes of people just coming to him and getting some wisdom from him. He had an awesome session, and I'm so excited to have him on Aspire to Lead. So with that, sir, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Yes. So let's dive in, because I was kind of sharing before we push record. I had a mentee who I was mentoring, and he was in this book, and he was just like always having his nose in it. He had a highlighter. I swear, like every page was highlighted top to bottom as he was trying to become an assistant principal and learning the process of that, studying for his licensure. And I was like, who is that? And he's like, what? You don't know who Principal Kafele is? You got to check him out. He pulled it up on his phone, YouTube. And I dove in and found out so much of your wonderful work. And I would just love for you to share a little bit with our listeners about, your journey, both as an educator, but then also as a leader.
Yeah, my journey in education began in 1988 as a fifth grade elementary school teacher in Brooklyn, New York City. This was me just trying to find myself. So that wasn't what I went to school for. And I fell in love with it. Hadn't taken not one course in education. I said, okay, I think I'm going to like this. So I took courses and went back to school, but went back home because I'm not from New York. I'm from Jersey. So went back home to East Orange, New Jersey, and became a teacher there. In my fourth year, they named me the teacher of the year for the school, the district, the county, and New Jersey State finalist teacher of the year. So I really dove in deep in terms of trying to learn the things that I did not learn in undergraduate school to become successful. But somewhere in there, I decided I wanted to become a principal. So went back to school, got my master's in education administration, and became an assistant principal for a year, and then a principal for 14 years. But all along, my only goal in life was to be a speaker. Not a consultant, which I am one, but a speaker, because the people that I admired most held microphones in various different capacities. But I had no story. I had nothing to talk about. So I put it on the back burner and did it on the side. So when I say the side, I by the time we got to 2011, when I left my principalship, I had done it probably over 1,000 times. So that was my side. Not making any money, just out there trying to build a name for myself, and then left my school in 2011, my high school. Been out here in these speaker streets since 2011, past 15 years.
That's incredible. Yeah, I love that you say 1,000 times as a side gig. That's funny.
Yeah.
But I know you've made a huge impact. I've heard your name so many times. Like you're talking about thousands of times of speaking, but I think now I feel like I've heard your name 1,000 times also, just in passing with talking with other folks. And so let's talk about early in your journey. So for our aspiring leaders, I know this is a trap that a lot of them get pulled into early in their journey. For instance, what is the difference between managing a school and truly leading a school?
Yeah. Look, great question to start off with. When you manage a school, you think about that word manage, and that's what you're doing. You're just managing. And when you're someone who's in the capacity of just managing, holding it together, right, doing all the administrative things that are necessary for you to do, and all those kinds of things, that's not necessarily taking a youngster that's sitting in that school that sees no correlation between giving maximum effort in the classroom every day and how that translates into success later on in life. You're just managing a school. So you're probably not connecting with that kid. Now, I'm trying not to say what I haven't said, but let me just put it in the mix. I'm referring to whom I call young Principal Kafele. So, and I say to principals all over America, I said, you cannot let those young Principal Kafeles in your school just wander off into nothing, right? Because they have potential. I attended 4 high schools for 5 years. I failed all of them. right? The only thing I passed was PE. I had trauma in my life. I had things that I was grappling with that I didn't grapple with well. So therefore, school meant nothing to me. So I graduated in 5 years, but they probably could have kept me for 6, but just said go, right? So I don't think I had the credits to graduate. That's what I'm saying. So then for the next 5 years, I do absolutely nothing. Well, let me put it this way. I do absolutely nothing, but the things I did do, I don't want to put on this recording, right?
Sure.
So in terms of just the foolishness. So anyway, I get tired of that kind of living 10 years and decide to go to college and study business, and hence the reason I didn't study education. But I graduate summa cum laude. And coincidentally, from the school you see on my chest here, Kane University here in
Yeah.
Jersey. So here's the thing. I didn't get smart. It was in me, but there was nothing or anybody that could tap into me and bring it out of me. So I always say, well, as it relates to that question, if you're managing a school, and that's when you look in your mirror at the end of the day, meaning your game film, and when you reflect on your day and you know that there's nothing about your journey in that school throughout the course of the day, then we can conclude that those young Principal Kafeles, and there's probably a lot of them in your school, did not move from here to here because you're there during the course of that day. I want to be able to look in my mirror and say, that youngster that doesn't see the significance of being here is moving along because I woke up in the morning. The difference, that other one, that leader, that person's leading, and at the core of that leadership is instruction, ensuring that top-notch, world-class instruction is occurring in every classroom in the building. Outside of school safety, there's nothing more significant than we can be doing in that building.
All right. Well, we're going to bridge this. I want to talk about that instructional leadership because I think that's something that's missing. I think a lot of folks, to your point, is doing the management side of things, the clerical or the things that are checking the boxes. And so I'm wondering, what should every school leader be doing more intentionally to strengthen the instructional core of their school?
Yeah, like we'll use that terminology, instructional leader. But as I always say, we got to break that down, because at the heart and soul of instructional leadership is the coaching component, right? The teaching component. Who am I in relationship to XYZ teacher in that building, right? Is there a correlation between my leadership and the pedagogical growth and development of the teacher? Does every teacher need me the same way? No. So we'll look at the landscape of staff and we'll determine who needs me, my team, my instructional coaches, in what way, so that we can grow them. I'm a sports guy. Those were the areas I did well in high school, right? And beyond. I'm a sports guy, so I tend to see life through the lens of an athlete, of a coach. So in this regard, I'm looking at a coach who's in the locker room as a high school football team is preparing for this game. So the team is putting on their pads, putting on their uniform, and they're getting themselves mentally ready for the game on a Friday night under the lights. And as we're ready to go out onto the field, the coach says, bring it in, so he can give them that final message. So he gives them that message, and then he yells, let's get this win. And now they respond, let's go. And now they're getting ready to walk out onto the field. But the coach realizes after they take 2 or 3 steps, I forgot to tell you the most critical component. Come back. And they come back and they're puzzled, like, what is going on? And coach says, fellas, I forgot to tell you, throughout the course of this game, if you need me or any of the assistants, come back. Let us know what the concern is. We'll respond, and then you go out there and get this win. So now in the game, the offense is on the field, the defense is on the sidelines with second and third stringers, but the adults, the coaches, are not there. They're in the locker room. So I typically say to my audiences, I say, I don't have to ask you if you've ever seen that before, because you haven't. We've never seen that. But if you switch genres and go to the school, we can say, oh, we that's pretty ordinary. We see that all the time, because the teacher is the athlete, the head coach is the principal, and the assistant coaches are the assistant principals. So we know that a teacher, even a struggling teacher, can go a full year, and with the exception of a formal observation, formal evaluation, can go a full year with zero interaction, zero coaching at all. And we wonder, we scratch our heads, What's wrong with young Principal Kafele? Well, he's in a classroom with an ineffective teacher who's probably going to be rewarded at the end of the year with a satisfactory evaluation.
Such a good analogy, because you're right. That's how it is.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so true with the system. Okay, so let's talk about the development, right, of a healthy school. I can only imagine that what you're describing is going to affect the campus climate and culture.
Yeah.
So, in addition to the instructional component that we just discussed, what is the first shift that you think all of our leaders need to do to make it so that it is a healthy school climate and culture?
Yeah, we talk about the significance of culture, and if we have a culture conducive to high academic performance. But there's another way in this regard that I talk about culture, and that's a culture of instructional leadership. Does that culture exist where we've literally brought the teachers in, that they have bought in or adhered to or just gravitated to the fact that this model that we have in place, where I'm engaging in discussion, interaction, conversation with my evaluator of record, my supervisor or instructional coach, this is making me better at what I do, because there's another set of eyes on my pedagogy in the classroom. There's a conversation that's occurring before this leader even steps into my classroom, so that we can discuss this thing that I'm struggling with, inclusive of suggestion or strategy as to how I can become better. Which begs the question, as leader, do I bring strategy that goes beyond who I was as a classroom teacher? Because imagine the only thing that I can offer is what I used to do. Well, if that teacher is identical to you relative to personality, worldview, and I can go on, then maybe your strategies will work. But let's say that you're like myself, an inner city guy. You've got your particular agenda, mission, personal vision in terms of what it is you're trying to accomplish. Like, just to make that concrete, my school was the same city I grew up in, right? The same city I was born and raised in. So therefore, my work was only partially professional. It was more so personal, because this is the city that produced me, the city that didn't capture me the way it should have. So I'm not going to repeat that now as a teacher and subsequently as a principal. So I'm bringing a certain perspective, a certain energy, a certain passion that teacher may not have, because the city that I'm in this case, East Orange, New Jersey, may not be personal for you. The children may be, but the city may not be. So therefore, if I bring that energy to a conversation with the teacher, and then subsequently try to impose certain strategy for your pedagogy, it may not jibe with your personality. So like the way I'm talking on here right now, because my passion comes out anytime I'm talking education. This is not for everybody, right? Everybody's not going to be as passionate when they're talking about education. Yep. Right. And I know I've listened to people, they say, I like Kafele, but he could be a bit much sometimes. Right. Well, so therefore, I've actually seen that written. Right. So therefore, when I'm sitting with a teacher, I have to consider that your world may not be my world. So I can't expect you to become mini me. So what strategies do I bring to the conversation that are going to help you from where you are in the equation? That matters. And I think that a lot of us, and I don't want to quantify that, but I think there are probably too many of us that all we have is what was successful for us.
Totally.
Yeah. We got to have more than that.
Well, and I've seen that personally. I mean, and shoot, if I'm being honest, especially when I was a young leader, I did the same thing, right? Well, this worked for me in my classroom, and they thought I was a good teacher, and that's why I'm an administrator. So now you're going to do what I did, right? Yeah. But that, to your point, if we're looking in the sports arena, that's not what a good coach does.
That's right.
You do what the strengths of your athletes are, and you mold your offense and your defense to fit the needs of them and what they do best, right? Well, why wouldn't we do that also in the classroom?
That's right. So, and I totally shifted the question. So let me go back to the question. So therefore, in that conversation, which is the word I always prefer over discussion and meeting and all that kind of thing, because I want to make sure it's a two-way street and that both of us feel really good about this conversation. So this conversation about a particular skill set. Not looking to see everything the classroom can offer. I just want to see. I want to look at this one thing that I saw and you agreed. This is an area that we can strengthen. Then I go into the classroom. I don't have to spend a whole day in there. I'm going in there to see that. And then I want to be able to have a follow-up with you as soon as possible. And then we plan on what next steps are. But it's like I always say, I'm not trying to get you. I just want to grow you. But I want it to be us mutually doing in the process of getting it done. But the bottom line is it's coaching. That's all it is. It's coaching, but it's creating a culture where a teacher or teachers will embrace the coaching. Because if it's a culture, if it's a prevailing culture in the building that says, I don't like this, I hate this, here he comes, all that kind of thing, then this is not going to work, right? So a culture of instructional leadership, a culture of instructional coaching matters.
For sure. That's going to be a ripple effect throughout the entire building, especially if they feel valued and they feel safe in that experience.
That's right.
If they see you as a sheriff coming in, obviously that's going to kill the climate and culture of your campus. So you need to make sure. Well, I can only imagine, and you probably had this too, especially when I was a new leader or new on the campus, I'd walk into a classroom and they jump up and then from their desk and they're running over to a kid and I don't need a performance. Like I just want to see what's going on in the classroom and you can sit at your desk if that's what's needed in the moment. Like I'm not here, like you said, as a gotcha. So I love everything you said. All right, let's move on. So you talk about closing the attitude gap, and I would love for you just to explain that terminology. And then also, how does that look like for our school leaders as a daily practice?
Yeah. Going back to my first year as a teacher, there was this language, closing the achievement gap. And I can never wrap my mind around that. It's probably because of the kind of reading I exposed myself to before becoming a teacher. So I said achievement gap. That implies that these youngsters on the wrong side of the gap can't get it done. So we'll spend our whole careers trying to close this gap. And typically it's rooted in assessment scores. So I said, no, there's a lot of other gaps out here. I said, but a lot of those gaps, such as opportunity gap, I really don't have influence over it. Not directly anyway, indirectly in terms of what we accomplish in this classroom. I said, but what is the variable that I have direct influence over in this classroom? And I said, clearly, the attitude of young people, the attitude of myself. And when I became principal, and the attitudes of staff. I have influence. I don't want to use the word control, but I have influence over the attitudes of the children who are in my classroom, the children who are in my school, including staff. So I said, so the achievement gap, that's not my issue. I said the attitude gap is my issue, but I needed to give that a definition. So I said the attitude gap is simply the gap. And here we hold up the hands. You got this youngster over here who's just excited, ready to go. This youngster is going to be successful regardless of who the teacher is, who the leadership is, whatever, what's happening in the neighborhood. But then you got this other youngster over here who's just as brilliant, but the challenges are so overwhelming that we don't see it. So we think that there's some other issues there, not realizing this youngster wants it just as bad as this youngster, but this youngster's got so much on the plate. So you got this gap, and then everybody in between. I said, that's the gap I want to close. The gap between those students who have the will, and that's the key word, the will to achieve excellence, and those who do not. I want to tap into the will of a youngster. And going back to sports, you prepare physically all week long, all season long, all year long. But you walk out onto the field knowing that you're going against the best school in the conference. And now you psych yourself out in the locker room, maybe even before you got to the game. We can't beat them. Well, the game is over. You don't have the will to win, right? So I want to tap into the will. I want to go here. I want to go here on that youngster. And that became my foundation. It became my claim to fame. It became my response to everybody that had questions of how are you doing what you're doing, to be so young at the time, to be so new. How are you getting it done? And my response was simply because I'm not chasing what you're chasing. You're chasing closing the achievement gap. I'm not. I'm chasing closing the attitude gap. We're not playing on the same field. So I'm getting different results from you, period. End of story. And as I always say, drop the mic.
I love it so much. Yeah, two different playing fields. All right.
Yeah.
So Principal Kafele, I want to talk about some of the misconceptions early. You talked about your younger self, and
Yeah.
I know for myself there were traps and sinkholes that I was falling in constantly and tripping on. And you had said control versus influence. And I know I had this whole misperception of like, well, if I just say to do it, they're just going to do it, right? That's the control piece versus obviously there's a much deeper piece of influence and leadership. But were there any things that tripped you up early in your career?
Yeah, whole lot. One was the misconception that the role of a assistant principal was to be a disciplinarian. So I walked right in there, and that was my assignment. And the culture was such that it kept me busy all day long, from the time I walked into the building until the time the students left the building. But my superintendent knew my skill set from the classroom. So once we finished that year, he called me. He said, let's go. We're getting ready to make that move, even though I got to interview with everybody else. You know how that works. So I became principal of the same school. But what did I know about principal leadership? I wasn't exposed to anything except discipline, cafeteria duty, bus duty, and the inventory clerk for the teacher's supplies, right? So that's all I knew. So I had to figure it out. So it took me a couple of years. It took me about 3 years maybe to figure out this thing called principal leadership, because I just wasn't groomed in it. You know, I did well in grad school, but that's textbook. You know, now I'm on the job. I got to figure this thing out. So I figured it out, but that's the part, we say about somebody, they have a chip on their shoulder. And I say that there's a few categories that I don't have a chip. I got a whole boulder on both shoulders. And one of those aspects in which I use that, well, one is young Principal Kafele. And then one of the others is the fact that I was misused as an AP. And, I came up with this expression. I say that the assistant principalship is the most misunderstood and underutilized position in all of education. Went on and wrote a blog of that title in 2000, if I remember correctly, 18 or 19, probably 19. And it was the only blog that I've ever written, in terms of my own blog page. It's the only one that I've ever written that went viral. It was incredible because it resonated with so many people. So when I wrote the Assistant Principal 50, that book would never have been written if I hadn't written that blog post. Because of that blog post, that became the basis of that book, and it's clearly the most sought after book I've ever written. I've written 14 books, but I've never had one that sold like that book. Because that kind of content just resonated with people, because it said that it's saying in a nutshell, there's so much more to the assistant principalship than being a disciplinarian. So people use it. I know a lot of schools use it and all that kind of.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Universities, yeah.
That's the book I see the most from, my experience in my journey with you. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that book. I think, every teacher that's trying, and this is what the birth of this podcast was, is there's so many people seeking information, because a lot of them feel like, it's a mystery as to how do I get into this role. And then, like, to your point, I go through a master's program, but it's a book world. It's a perfect world. This isn't real life. And when I get onto that job for the first time, I'm knocked over because I'm like, I don't remember learning about this in the textbook. I don't remember this in class. Like, I'm having to learn through experience. And this is vastly different than what I expected and imagined. And so now I'm struggling. And so I think your book, does a wonderful job of laying out, here's a framework and here are all the things that you need to be successful in that role, which is lacking in the educational space. So kudos to you for that, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of the other books too, because I think this is a great segue to that. You just said it yourself. You got a few of them. So is there a couple books that you would recommend for our listeners? I was telling you before, we've got folks that are trying to get into leadership. That's a lot of the audience, but we also got a bunch of current leaders, and that goes from the campus level all the way to the district. So are there a couple books that you would recommend for our listeners to grab?
Yeah. The main 2 to 4, the Assistant Principal 50, as I said. Critical Questions for Meaningful Leadership and Professional Growth is the subtitle. But the one I wrote recently, 2025, what is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise? That question All it was a question that I used to raise in presentations. I didn't have any content around it. It was just a question that I asked leaders to ask of themselves. What is my value? And then we put emphasis on this word value in terms of things and people we value, just to give attention to that word. What is my value? And then instructionally, not what is my value to the teachers I supervise, what is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise? Very different question. And it created discomfort in the room, and the reason I know that is because people would tell me that. So, oh my God, Kafele, that question hurts, right? And I said, good, that's the intent. It's not meant to inspire you. It's meant to compel you to look within yourself and ask yourself, do you bring value to a teacher's pedagogy, instruction in the classroom? So that book was published in 2025, and I consider it, as much as I love the Assistant Principal 50, I consider it the most important book that I've ever written, because the whole book is instructional leadership. Everything, I think it's 10 chapters here, 10 chapters, and every chapter, we're just looking at instructional leadership through different lenses. But if I could throw these other two, the Principal 50, which was written before the Assistant Principal 50, and these are relatively thin books, and these are books that people just use as resources. The Principal 50, there's an aspiring Principal 50, but I was trying to bypass that one, though it's important. But the other one is my school a better school because I lead it? That question was my quintessential question as a leader. Every day, I stand in front of the building and I ask myself at dismissal, once the students left, and I would just kind of have a conversation with the front of the building, the facade of the building, and ask the question every day, is my school a better school because I lead it? Now, one could say, man, why you ask the same question every day? And the answer is simple, because the answer would vary. If it was a consistent yes, 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 then there's no need. But in being brutally honest with myself, not letting the ego get in the way, then there was a lot of no's. It's not a better school. Somebody else could have walked into this school today and taken these children to heights that I failed to do so in terms of my leadership capacity. And so therefore, I'd have to go to my office and journal, like, what were the reasons, right? All right, so we figured out the reasons. What's the goals for tomorrow? And what's the strategy for tomorrow? And that was my ritual every day for years. So is my school a better school because I lead it? But in asking that question, I had criteria. It wasn't like I'm looking at the totality of leadership. I'd be standing outside for the next 12 hours, right? Like I said, what are the most important aspects of my leadership, not of the next person's leadership, because everybody's going to look at it through a different lens. But for me, obviously, I'm sharing this with your listeners to consider. But so for me, directly, the most critical aspect of my leadership outside of school safety, which I put in a separate category, I said, number one, instructional leadership, and number two, student engagement. That's it. Just those two. Instructional leadership in terms of how I'm going to assess my performance today. Who was I in terms of instruction in the classroom? Number two, who was I relative to student engagement? Meaning, who'd I talk to today? Who did I have a conversation with, right? Not just good morning, but who did I, between classes, cafeteria, before school, after school, wherever, who did I engage with today beyond good morning, good evening, right? I want to talk to kids, right? So those were my two criteria. So with that first one being instructional leadership, that's where that second question came from. What is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise? If I wasn't having that conversation, that book probably would have never been written because it wouldn't have been on my radar. But in having that everyday conversation, that here comes that question: what is my value instructionally to the teachers I supervise?
Yeah. So, Principal Kafele, do you think there's a lack of honest self-assessment for leaders?
It could be, because sometimes we don't want to deal with those things that challenge us most, or those things that frustrate us or discourage us, that even make us want to leave. It could be, or we want to blame, we want to point fingers, and I can understand pointing fingers. I know I've pointed my fingers at a few things, right? So I understand that, but at the end of the day, if I want to stay in this business for a long time, then I got to start pointing that finger at me and asking myself, what can I do differently, right? How can I navigate these challenges differently? And as I say on my platform all the time, sometimes after, we've exhausted all possibilities, maybe, and just maybe the place we're at right now, maybe that's not the building with our name on it. Sometimes, we think we've got to be married to a certain place that we feel we can't grow. I know you're getting ready to close, but let me just throw this out at, because this might be what blesses somebody. I got to a point where I was completely frustrated, right? Completely. We don't have time to go into the ins and outs of it, but completely frustrated. And when I say that, to the point where I needed therapy, right? As I would think many of us as principals and APs probably need therapy, but would never seek it out. So I probably needed therapy. So I got recruited to another district, and I fought it because I wanted to stay where I was born and raised, right? So, but they kept calling. They knew my work. I said, okay. They said, come on down here and start over. Got a school for you. Lowest performing school in the district. This is where you want to be. It's got your name on it. I said to myself, I'll stay here for 1 year. Never worked in a high school in my life. I'll stay here for 1 year, get a high school on my resume, because I know I'm going to be a speaker. And I fell in love with it that first year. So I said, let me stay a second year. And then I loved it even more. So I said, okay, I'm going to stay here till the incoming freshman graduate. So that'll be 4 years. After them 4 years, I said, nah, I got to stay. So then I said, I'll leave in my 5th year. Well, my 5th year, I got the Milken Award, right? So with the Milken Award, and one of the most prestigious awards you can achieve in education, my whole school is standing there giving me a standing ovation. I can't leave them, right? Nope. So I come back for year 6. And then finally, somewhere in the spring, I told them, I said, look, y'all, y'all know I speak. Everyone in this building knows this is what I do. I got to chase this dream, y'all. So they understood. A lot of my girls cried, but they understood. Everybody came down on the floor after I finished, because they were in the bleachers, and they hugging me and they're telling me, I understand. You got to chase that dream as an entrepreneur. And so I was 50 years old at the time, and I left that June, started July 1, doing this work with 0 clients, and we built something. So that's that.
It's a great message, though, and I want to talk about what you've built. So in addition to the books, I know you're on YouTube a lot. Yeah. You have a ton of content there. Will you just share out some of the things that you have built over this time since the time that you left that high school?
Yeah, in addition to just speaking at all these conferences and building that name recognition, and this is for someone out there that's trying to figure it out, just all those conferences on our dime. I was doing that while I was a principal as well, weekends and summers, all that kind of thing, just being at all these conferences, and you're building a name. And then when I left, I intensified it, and people started knowing I was here, and I started getting the calls. And next thing I knew, my calendar was full 12 months for the next several years. But in the meantime, this thing called social media was emerging. And quite frankly, my students, everyone knew I was a speaker, because if I went somewhere to speak, I would announce it over the PA. I'm going to such and such. I'll be back on Monday morning, because I'll be flying out on that Friday. So my seniors and juniors primarily, Kafele, you got to get on social media. Nah, they're all in my ear. Kafele, you got to get on social media. You're trying to build something, but you're not on social media. I don't need that, y'all. No, you do need it, right? I mean, they a lot of them, they're coming at me. So finally, I got on it. And I became a beast with it. I saw the significance of it, whether it's video, whether it's posting, whatever it is. And I always say, thank God for those kids that opened my eyes to something that I just wasn't open to. I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't think I needed it. So then, YouTube became a big platform for me. And then when the pandemic came, YouTube, even way before the pandemic, Facebook, Instagram, I shied away from it for years. My kids were, again, my students and my family were trying to convince me I wouldn't do it. And then finally, I got on it late. So I don't have a lot of followers on that compared to Facebook and X and YouTube, because I got on so late that the people who are following me on Instagram are following me on all the other platforms. And I'm just duplicating. But anyway, Facebook creates Facebook Live. I just jumped right on that. It's like I didn't know that it was a thing to do a broadcast. right? I just knew that it exists. I knew people were playing around with it different ways, right? But I created a show like almost right when it became a thing, sitting in my kitchen on Sunday mornings, a leadership platform called Let's Talk, right? Let's Talk Leadership. And I was every Sunday, I'm sitting in my kitchen. And then the pandemic comes. I said, oh, all right, everybody's canceled out. So I'm not going to be flying nowhere. But this thing called Zoom, I can call these clients back and say, we could do this here. So I did more presenting. I made almost $1 million during that 1 year sitting here because I was doing 5 and 6 sessions a day, every day, including Saturdays, right? So, and that's not boasting about the money, it's to say I was pulling in a lot. I was getting a lot of business because people said, oh, we can do this virtually. So everybody wanted to do it. So I'm down here sitting right here at 8 o'clock on a given day until about 10 o'clock at night because I'm on the West Coast now in the evening hours because I'm in the East, but in the evening hours I'm doing West Coast stuff. So I'm worn out. I go upstairs, go to bed, and then the next day, the same thing. I'm just running my mouth on this computer all day long. So I said to myself, man, we're home and I'm not getting to talk to them APs the way I used to talk to. Let me create a platform here, Virtual AP Leadership Academy. 10,000 people that first day. And I said, wow. And it stayed that way. I said, this is going to be 18 weeks. That's it. Just 18 weeks. That would be the first Saturday in May, 2020 until the last Saturday in August. And then I'm done. But here's what happened. Them numbers, people kept tuning in. I said, how do I say no? So now this coming Saturday will be week number 312 consecutively.
Wow.
Consecutively. I have not missed a Saturday. Now I'm on the road a lot on Saturdays.
Yeah.
So when I'm on the road, I tell the client, yeah, I'll do your keynote in the morning, early before 10:30 or after 1 o'clock. But from 10:30 to 1 o'clock, I can't be here because you got to give me a room or I got to drive back to the hotel. And that'll probably make me late coming back. So if you can give me a room, strong Wi-Fi, and we do it in the room, So that's how we go on 312 consecutive Saturdays.
I'm seeing a theme, a thread of you just continuously showing up and seeing things grow. Both at the campus level, but then also in the work that you're doing now. So just for everyone that's listening, of course, I will have all the links. I'm going to throw each of the books that Principal Kafele had talked about before, and those will be in the show notes also, or you can head over to joshstamper.com. We'll have a designated page for this episode. And of course, have his links, his websites. We'll have all the stuff because I want you to tap into this brilliance. This is just a small snippet of what is to offer. And this guy is amazing. I've seen it personally, but I've also seen all the amazing content. So I want you to connect. I want you to ask questions. I want you in those communities, especially if you're seeking to aspire to be a leader. Because like I said, there's a ton of wisdom right here that you can tap into. And a lot of them are free. I'm going to close this out real quick. If there's one thing that you would recommend for our aspiring or current leaders that they could do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I'm going to use a slang. Be a beast at your instructional leadership, because at the end of the day, the children are in the building to learn. But if that teacher lacks competence or ability, then that's on your leadership. You can't go to your mirror and look at yourself with your chest out and say, I'm good. I'm great at what I do. I'm amazing at what I do. And because I'm going to ask the question based on what is the basis? The basis has got to be the performance of your children, whatever indicators that you use to measure their performance. But the correlation is your coaching and that teacher. Doesn't mean that teacher can't be great without you, because they can, right? But you got some teachers in there who are struggling. And the basis of their growth may be who you are as their coach.
Well, you're amazing, extremely inspirational, and I appreciate your time so much, Principal Kafele. And I want the listeners to not only be taking notes of all these wonderful nuggets, but also I want you to share this episode out with other folks, because I know that the words that are spoken today are actually going to influence the decisions of our future and current leaders. And I would love for folks to be able to share out this wonderful message that has been spoken today. And with that, I want to thank you not only for the work that you're doing, the influence that you have on so many amazing leaders out there, but for you continuously showing up every single week and making a huge impact in the world of education.
Yes, sir. I appreciate you. Appreciate you immensely.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.